Hello, Eric Lee here with Equity Real Estate and Elite Agent Training. I want to go over this great article that was in Realtor magazine. It discusses the top claim against agents, which is failure to disclose. And this has been absolutely true with my own history as well. I've seen so many agents get into trouble for this issue, failure to disclose. And here's the crazy thing that this article doesn't cover is sometimes it didn't have anything to do with the agent. Sometimes that's just the way it works. When you get attorneys involved, it can get ugly. So I want to go over this article and do a review of it and then talk about ways that you can protect both your clients and yourself from some of these crazy things that are coming up. One of the things that I like about this article, I'll scroll down a little bit, is it addresses the major issues that were created with the last couple of years with right here, people waiving the home inspection contingency to win bidding wars. It was something that I advised against the entire time. It wasn't a good practice to be doing, but a lot of people felt compelled to do it to be able to compete. And so what they did is they just waived all their ability, their due diligence. And that has led to problems. We're already seeing issues where buyers are experiencing some form of buyer's remorse. And that may be caused by a multiple of factors, whether it's just that they waived their inspection and they got into the home and now they're getting surprised with things, or maybe it's because the market has softened a little bit and they feel like they overpaid and they want to go blame somebody somewhere. Here's the real concerning thing about the rest of this paragraph up here is not only did they waive their home inspection contingency, 60% of sellers admit to not disclosing a known problem with their property to buyers, according to a study there. Now, that is really alarming. And so we've got a couple of things that we can do as agents to protect our clients on both the buy side and the sell side here. First of all, sellers, they need to know that the law and the contract requires them to disclose material defects. And a lot of them don't know that. And so they'll hide things, they'll paint over things, they'll paint over the water stains. They'll do things to hide material defects, and they don't know they're committing fraud. And that's one of the things that an agent can do is help sit them down and help them understand how that can come back to haunt them years afterwards. All right. They can get sued, they'll lose. You can't commit fraud, right? But they don't think of it as fraud. They just think, I don't want to disclose these things or let the buyer beware. If they find it out, that's up to them, but I'm not actively going to disclose. And that's not what they're required to do. They're required to disclose any material information that would affect that transaction. And if there's issues with the house, that's material information right there. From a buyer's perspective, when we're coming into it, obviously we don't want to waive the home inspection contingency. But even if we did waive the due diligence deadline, we certainly don't want to waive our due diligence ability. We want to go in there and say, okay, we're not going to make our offer subject to an inspection, but we still want to do the inspection. We want to know what we're getting into. So here's an instance here where one agent, now this wasn't the seller, the agent was ordered to pay a $170,000 fine after being found to have shown a reckless disregard for the truth by not disclosing a listing's prior water damage. And that's crazy because typically that would be the seller, the buyer sues the seller. In this case, it was the agent that was ordered to pay this fine because maybe they knew about it and hid it. And quite often when we see this come up, it's an agent selling their own property. So they are the principal in the transaction. They're the ones that are failing to disclose, and they quite frankly should know better of everyone. All right, so let's look at some of their best practices here. And I agree with all of these. Don't complete a disclosure form on behalf of a seller. And I see agents tempted to do this in cases where the seller is very elderly or something like that. Don't do it. And it's really agents with a good heart. I want to help somebody out. I'm trying to help. I'm trying to be a good person. I know what their struggles are, but you can't do some of these things. All right. So if they don't have any family, they don't have anybody else, encourage them to find somebody. If they can't fill things out competently, they could get an attorney, they could get a whole lot of people. Just don't let them get you. Okay. You don't complete the seller's disclosure form on behalf of a seller. Again, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to encourage them, we're going to help them understand the law and their requirements under the law to reveal all the known facts and defects and why that's important. Okay, we're going to go over the seller's disclosure form that we provide to them and make sure that they answered all the questions. And if they did, check a box, yes, but they didn't give an explanation. Let's get an explanation from them. Help them be as thorough as possible. If they refuse to disclose a material fact that you're aware of, then we need to disclose it to the buyer. But before you do that, and we need to do it because, again, this is part of legal requirement, right? And so you can get in trouble if you don't. But you don't want to have a seller saying, don't disclose this, and you go and do it, because we're also supposed to follow our seller's legal instructions. Now, that's not a legal instruction, but we need to first sit down with our seller, make sure they understand that's not a legal instruction to hide things. That's a fraudulent instruction, and it could impact both of us. So we want to sit down and educate them, help them understand why we can't hide things, even if they want to, why we can't, and nobody should. And that's very important, to have that conversation with them and help them understand. And then, of course, any information that the seller provides to the buyer, we want records of that. Any research that was done, anything like that, we want records. And I'm going to take it a step further. And I think this is really important, because this is something, again, just primarily as a result of the last few years and some of the craziness that happened, is that agents need to protect themselves further, because here's the common scenario that comes up. A new buyer moves into the home. They're frustrated for any of the number of reasons I mentioned earlier. They want to take it out on somebody. They call an attorney. Some of these repairs are massive. If you're replacing roofs, if you're getting water damage, some of these are well into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. We've seen claims go over $250. All right. That's a lot of money to get hit with as a fine, right? Nobody wants that. No buyers, sellers, agents, nobody wants that. So in this case, the buyer moves in, they're frustrated. They get an attorney because it's a substantial problem that they're facing now. And that attorney has a discussion. Well, first of all, the buyers sue the sellers get an attorney as well. And the seller's attorney has a discussion with them about ways that they can limit their liability. Now, if you're an attorney, I apologize if you're hearing this, because maybe it paints attorneys in a bad light, but I've seen it happen over and over and over. And that's where the attorneys are scrambling to protect their client, the previous homeowner, the person that sold the home, that should have disclosed some things, that didn't disclose some things. And the attorney says, hey, is it possible that you had a discussion about this issue with your agent? Because if you had a discussion with your agent, then it was your agent's duty to disclose that. And we can say that we assumed that you were going to disclose that, because the agent knows the law. They knows that they should have disclosed it. So is it possible that you had this discussion with your agent? By the way, your agent might have errors and omissions insurance. And so if we can shift the focus onto them, they have insurance that protects them and covers them in instances like this. And I've even seen people where their own family is suing them. Their old best friends who they were helping out are suing them, because they're convinced somehow that it's not going to harm the agent, because they're protected by this magical E&O insurance. Guys, first of all, that isn't how it works. Insurance is never magical. If you do get a claim and they do cover it, your rates rise. There's minimum amounts that still everybody has to pay, and it's not an easy thing. Okay, there's no free money out there for anybody. And so anyhow, this seller is convinced by their attorney that, it is possible I had this discussion with my agent and told them about this defect, and assumed that they would go ahead and disclose that to the other party, which they didn't do. So now it's not my fault, it's my agent's fault. And then the agent's over there saying, no, we didn't have this discussion. They don't have any proof. They don't have anything in writing. And you know what? Agents tend to lose those arguments. So we went a step further for our agents. We created this seller disclosure confirmation form. And it has some great information in here that I think every agent, number one, needs to be aware of, needs to be communicating with their client, number two, and number three, have their client sign it, so that we have a record that we did have this discussion with our clients, and that there were no other discussions involved that we didn't get in writing. So I'm just going to go over a couple of key points of this without reading the entire thing. All right. One of the key things down here is we encourage you to fulfill this duty, which is full disclosure, to the fullest extent possible, despite any concerns you may have that the disclosed information may cause the buyer to back out of the transaction or request a price adjustment. So even though you're scared that this may kill the transaction or cause a price reduction because of what you're disclosing, you still have to disclose it. And that's very important for people to know. All right. We also talk about up here or up at the top, consider each question carefully, provide full responses. It's not an option to withhold or conceal information. You could be sued by the buyer for breach of contract. So there's lots of issues, and that paragraph covers it. And then they go down here and they sign. And this is what I like about this form, because it both educates agents and the public and serves as a very good reminder that, number one, you haven't informed us or made us aware of any conditions, defects about the property that aren't already in your signed property condition disclosure form. There have been no side discussions or communications of any kind regarding defects in the property that aren't in that disclosure form. We have fully and accurately filled out all the questions in the disclosure form. We're not withholding any relevant information. And if prior to the close of the property, so maybe we filled out our seller's disclosures when we listed the property, 3 months later it's closing, and since we've gotten a lot of water and the place is flooded, we need to make sure that that information is included in those seller's disclosures. So this says if prior to the closing of the sale, there's any new conditions that come up, those are added to the disclosures. This way, when that attorney comes to us and says, hey, they said that they had this conversation, we can show this paperwork that says, actually, we had no side conversations. They've signed this form. And this is proved as a great protection for our agents. So this is something that we're now requiring for all of our files, but something that I would recommend for anybody out there working in this market. As you're working with a seller, make sure that they understand their obligations under the law and that you're not facilitating in any way holding back information, even if it does hurt the sale of the home or affect its price. That this is all required, and the potential fines, violations, lawsuits will cost way more than what they potentially might save by failing to disclose. Always a good idea, full disclosure. Thank you.